I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for this introductory lesson on New England state courts. This lesson is the latest of many provided by NEFAC that explore state freedom of information laws. We want you to know how to access government information, and these lessons are the best place to start. If you haven't already, please check out our classes on state public record and open meeting laws, as well as the Federal Freedom of Information Act. Each class builds off one another, and they all collectively provide a curriculum you won't find anywhere else. All lessons are at nefac.org/FOI guide. They're also on our YouTube channel, 5 Freedoms. Before we begin today's lesson, a special thanks to everyone who is helping us make these classes happen. The Society of Professional Journalists Foundation, SPJ New England, the Rhode Island Foundation, and the New England Society of News Editors. We appreciate everyone's support. Now, to introduce you to today's instructor, Emily Sweeney.
Hey everybody, I'm Emily Sweeney from the Boston Globe, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar, which is brought to you by the New England First Amendment Coalition. And this session is going to focus on the state courts in Rhode Island. And with us is Ray Marcaccio, and he's going to give us a general overview of how the courts work down in the Ocean State. Ray, thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you, and glad to be helping out, and I hope that this is helpful. This will be very basic. I'll go into just the basics of the judicial system here in Rhode Island, and then just briefly talk about access, but just in general terms, because we may be addressing that in more detail in a follow-up seminar or seminars. So I have here just a kind of a layout of what we would have as our state court system. And if you can see that okay, we have a number of judicial bodies in the state of Rhode Island, and some of these are, I'm sure, very familiar with you. Some are not. And the lowest levels that include the traffic tribunal, municipal court, probate court, those second and third ones, the municipal and the probate courts, those are run by the municipalities. So there would be 39 city and town court systems with a judge who is appointed by the highest form of the government in that town. So typically, the municipal court judges are appointed or nominated by the mayor, if there is a mayor, and then are affirmed with the approval of the city or town council. Probate court is much the same thing, where you have a lawyer who has usually a concentration in the state planning, who will be overseeing all of the adjudication of any probate court matter that comes before them in the local level. But really, for you, most of the judicial bodies that you're going to be interested in would be the ones that relate to state functions. So if you look at the one furthest to the left at the bottom row, the traffic tribunal, that would be to adjudicate any kind of a moving violation, and that would include any kind of use of alcohol, for example, or some kind of an expiration of a license. The state traffic tribunal is in one location in Cranston, and that would be where all of those matters will be heard. The next level is something that might be more familiar to you. The first one is a very specific court. That's the workers' compensation court. So in that system, the judges, once again, are appointed by the highest level of the government. In this case, the state governor would be appointing those members to that court, and they would then be approved by the General Assembly. And the judges would be overseeing a very detailed set of rules on how a person who is injured at work can be compensated. And that would be driven largely by testimony that shows that the injury was related to work, and then the nature of the injury, whether it's permanent or not. And then there's almost a formulaic way that the judge will go about calculating how much that person's injury would be worth from an employment setting, from a work-related injury setting. The course that I would be more familiar with as a civil trial attorney would start with the one right in the middle, and that's the district court. That's the one that I would, think you might consider to be the people's court, the one where most people will have interactions with the judicial branch. The jurisdiction of the district court is quite limited. It is for any civil claims that have a value between $0, $1 and $10,000. The judges sit on that bench. Again, they're appointed by the governor, approved by the General Assembly. They sit on that bench with that limited jurisdiction. They almost never have any authority that isn't given to them by a specific statute. The only exception would be for those, there are limited exceptions, but the main one is the one involving evictions. And the district courts have been given all power necessary, both legal as well as equitable, to discharge their duty in the context of an eviction. When I say legal versus equitable, the way to kind of think of that is, if you have a legal right, it's usually something that is enshrined in a case, or rather a statute, a regulation of some sort. There's some kind of a legal document typically issued by the government, the General Assembly, that gives you a right as a matter of law. That's different than rights of equity, and we're going to get into the court that deals with that. But the rights of equity are those where the court exercises their rights more from a moral compass. What is fair in this situation? And that's when you get into a number of equitable doctrines like unclean hands, which means that the court might think that there's a legal right here, but because you behave so badly in your dealings with the other person in a corrupt way, unfair way, immoral way, that you come to the court with, quote, unclean hands, and that might reduce your rights to relief before that court. District court typically doesn't get into the rights of equity. It's just a court of law, and it's limited in that $0 to $10,000 jurisdiction. It would also take other criminal matters that are going to come in where there's going to be a plea or some type of an arraignment. The family court is very similar to the superior court in the sense that it has very, very broad powers. The family court would be overseeing both what we would think of as divorce-related matters, as well as the rights of children. And while you might be walking in and out of a courtroom through all the ones that I just mentioned, not as likely in a family court. If there's going to be any kind of an adjudication with respect to the rights of a child, that door is going to be shut and will not be opened, except for very, very limited circumstances. So the rights there for people to see what's going on in the family court are much more limited than they would be, for example, in the district court. The court that has the broadest jurisdiction and that hears the most significant disputes in our state, and is the one that you would probably be most inclined to attend to watch the proceedings, is the Superior Court. So if you're in downtown Providence at 250 Benefit Street, that kind of majestic red building, I actually have a picture of it here in my office. Beautiful structure built in the late 1920s. That is the place where people go to adjudicate both their civil and criminal matters for Providence and Bristol counties. And any case, any Superior Court case with a jurisdiction between 5,000 So you can see an overlap with the district court, which goes from $1,000 to $10,000. Superior court starts at $5,000. You don't go to court if it's a value under that, and then it goes up infinitely. So there's no cap, obviously, at the superior court. The proceedings deal with all kinds of matters: contract disputes, personal injury, First Amendment rights. That is the court that has the full authority. The judges there have the full authority to hear and decide any matter that would be brought in those two counties, for Providence County, Bristol County. There are 3 other similar superior courts for Kent, Newport, and Washington. So those also have their own buildings in different parts of the state. They are all the same judges, and they actually will, from time to time, rotate between each of those counties. The Superior Court, like I said, can hear any kind of a contract or a civil dispute. It hears all of the criminal matters. And it's also the only court between, there is no court between that Superior Court and the Supreme Court. Many states have an appellate division by itself. And after a Superior Court makes a ruling, it goes to a mid-level appellate division for review of that decision on appeal. In our state, we don't have that. Maybe because we're a small state, it wasn't needed at one time, but at this point, there are a lot of cases that come before the Superior Court, and when they make a ruling, in the absence of an overrule by the Supreme Court, it stands. So lawyers will be looking for cases, obviously from the Supreme Court, but even by Superior Court judges, because they have some weight. They know that they will be looked at by their peers on that court. And while it's not binding on them, it certainly is something they would look at, because it's from another judge of the same level. And as I said, that judge would be making a decision which would only be reviewed by the Supreme Court if it gets that far. The final court for the state system would be our Rhode Island Supreme Court. And that courtroom is likewise at 250 Benefit Street. And that is where all appeals go by either by way of right or by way of discretion. And I'll talk about that in a second, but everything that can be appealed in one of those 2 ways goes to that court, and whatever it decides, that is the final decision of the dispute. There is no other recourse, unless, of course, it's one of those tiny matters that might be able to brought to the attention of the United States Supreme Court. But that is the final decision from the state court system. So these courts that we're looking at are the ones that you would generally be attending to observe. But the last 2, those top 2, would be the ones that would be, in most cases, the ones that you would be most interested in, because that's where all of the significant matters are heard. So I should also mention, because we're talking about court systems, if I can get it here, just the fact that we have another system in our state. We have the United States District Court. That's a court that's it's on Dorrance, or it says 1 Exchange Street, but it's right at the end of Kennedy Plaza. And the judges who sit in that court are Article 3 judges, United States Constitutional Article 3 judges. And, you know, in some ways, an Article 3 judge has almost the most power of any government official in our system. They hear something, they can rule on something here in Providence, and the effect, depending on what they decide, can affect every single state in the country. We've seen in more recent years these challenges by our executive branch brought in different district courts, United States district courts, and when they make a ruling, sometimes they make an injunction, which means stop, you can't do this any longer, and they enjoin the federal government. And sometimes that actually affects not just what's here in Rhode Island, but the government throughout the entire country. So the United States District Court is another judicial forum in our state. And this set of judges have quite broad powers over all criminal matters that are connected to a federal law that's been violated, and even civil matters that involve either a federal question or it might involve citizens from different states where they feel like, well, I'm from California. I don't think I can go to Providence County Superior Court and get a fair trial. That person or that entity, in all likelihood, if the case has a certain value, can go instead and have the matter transferred over to the United States District Court, where presumably they would receive a less parochial review because it's a federal judge appointed by the President of the United States, approved by the United States Congress. I won't speak much about this, but I just want to make sure you keep in mind that in this day and age, with the development of administrative agencies, there are many things that are adjudicated at this level, whether it's the City of Providence Licensing Board, a State Housing Authority Board, many agencies that make decisions that affect us in ways that are quite significant at times. And they're final unless they are appealed directly to our Supreme Court. So if there's a licensing decision in Providence, in almost all circumstances, after that licensing board makes a decision, it goes to the Supreme Court, if at all, for review. So I just want to, make sure that when we think about how things are adjudicated, and clearly the state Superior Court, United States District Court, those are the main ones you're going to be looking at. But bear in mind that we have these other agencies now, as we are becoming more and more regulated. By that I mean where the government, the executive branch, creates these agencies to regulate certain specific, very specialized areas, like Department of Environmental Management, coastal resources. And in many cases, those adjudications at that level, without any judge, so-called, remain final and can affect many people in the state. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of our judicial system.
That was a very good overview, Ray. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and let me just leave maybe just one rule of thumb when we're talking about access.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just in case there are no questions. When we want to get in to see what our judicial branch is doing, bear in mind that there are some restrictions on your access. But as a rule of thumb, I think the best way to look at this is the more that the government is involved in taking away a right. So the more that you're involved in, for example, something that might take away life, liberty, or property, if it's a criminal matter, that's where the public has the most recognized, cognizable legal right to be in the courtroom and see what's happening. So that's your pinnacle. If someone might lose their life or be subject to life imprisonment or any kind of a felony, the courts realize that that is something that, based on our constitutional system, require the most observation by the public. And for that reason, there are constitutional rights to attend those hearings. They're limited at times, obviously. But if anyone saw the Murdaugh trial from South Carolina, the courtroom was full. And there were cameras. There was one set up or two set up cameras to actually have that completely broadcast so the public could see it. As you move away from that level where you're going to have your rights taken away, including your liberty, and you move back lower down to a civil matter where it's a contract dispute, for example, the courts don't have the same level of recognition of your right to be there for all proceedings. There's a more deference provided to the judge to make sure that it's not disrupted. To shut down a criminal case, there is an exacting scrutiny. They have to specify the reasons why. And it's the highest level of scrutiny if they shut those doors. If you're in a civil case and you have two lawyers in front of a judge talking about a contract dispute, the judge has a lot more discretion, and a lot of deference is given to that judge. To, if you're causing what the judge thinks to be disruptive or distracting, you're out. That does not happen often. I'm not suggesting that that happens often thankfully in our judicial system, but just, I know I'll leave on this, but as a rule of thumb, know that your rights of access increase as the government's actions increase and take away rights of the individual.
Yeah, that was great. And I look forward to, learning more in the next class. And Ray, thank you so much for taking
My
the
pleasure.
time. Really
Okay.
appreciate it. And thanks, everybody.
All right,
Until
Emily,
next
be well.
time.
Take care, everybody.